Okay, so you start bringing these juices, your friends are interested, and one says, "I'd actually buy these from you," or I wanna buy a lot of them. Like, what happens next? What did you do?
I was like, okay, so when I was like, I need bottles because I don't know where to put these. I just literally have this one that I use. And it was like, um, those reusable bottles, one of a Bria bottle, but I took out the filter. And I was like, do you have anything that I could use? And she's like, well, just reuse water bottles. And I was like, that's kind of gross. I wouldn't do that. And I was like, okay, let me see what I could do and then I'll bring them. So I went to the dollar store and I just bought a bunch of
Mhm.
clear bottles that looked the same. I went to about seven different stores to try and find the same style. And I went home and I made them. And she's like, oh, how much do I owe you? And I was like, $1 for each one. Because I didn't know. I was like, I don't know how to
Yeah.
what do you charge a person, and I don't want to overcharge. I don't, want to undercharge. And at that point, I was like, I guess $1 for each one. And she was like, wow, that's super cheap. So I kept doing it, and everyone that I was working was like, oh, can I do this? Can I do this? Like, can I order? And it came to the point where I would literally be filling up my trunk of the car that I had with water bottles or bottles filled with my juices and coming to work and telling people, hey, I have your juice. And it kind of sounded so weird. And even now it does. And people are like, that's so crazy. How did you make this? I was like being up for 24/7, but I was used to it. Being in college, studying for finals, you're up for 24 hours, even though
Mhm.
it makes no logical sense because you can't absorb information if you're tired, nor can you comprehend it. But I was up and I was making them, and I was seeing a profit that I was like, wow, this is crazy. Because I started upping my prices a little and letting them know, like, hey, I have to buy this. The fruit I buy at the grocery store, but I buy also organic stuff. So I kind of, have to cover my costs because I don't want to be like, hey, you guys bring me the fruit and then bring me the items and then I'll make it. It just doesn't make sense. So I was seeing a profit and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going really great. And someone was like, why don't you go to the farmer's market and start selling? And I was like, I could do that. I didn't know that that was a possibility. So little did I know that the farmer's market in downtown Summerlin, I had a connection there. And I would regularly buy some of their fruits just to support them. And I was like, how do I get into this? And they're like, here's what you need. It's like, we'll even let you pick it the spot that you want to be at. You'll be able to do what it is that you need. And, we're just gonna charge you this amount. So I was getting everything ready and I was like, I want to do this. And the obstacle of insurance came up. And I was like, businesses need insurance? I was like, what is this? I knew about, auto insurance, health insurance, but I was like, I didn't know there was business insurance. So I started going into the depths of learning on all what it is to have a business. And it surprised me. So I was going different places, asking, different locations, and I went just for business insurance. And I didn't know what I was getting into. And I was just like, along the way, I'll learn. And if something happens, but I'll be able to get myself out. So I ended up doing the application, but I never submitted it. And I was like, let me see how much I can really save to be able to cover in case I don't have to pay out. So I kept selling and selling, and it kind of branched out from where I worked at to, my my dad's friends, my mom's friends at the time. They were like, "Hey, my daughter sells this. Do you guys want some?" So I ended up renting out a kitchen, and I didn't know that that was a possibility. And I was like, "You can rent out kitchens," because my kitchen was very small in the condo that I lived in. And I was like, "I don't think this is also sanitary, so I want to be in a kitchen that is sanitary." And I would be there. I would go from work, go to class, be in the kitchen, come home, same thing. And it kind of took a toll. I was like, I'm doing this for other people, but I'm not even doing it for myself. Like, I would be around these juices and I wouldn't drink them. I was like, how can I sell these if I'm
Mm.
not even drinking them anymore? Because I was just too tired. And from there, I was like, okay, let's just keep doing this. Let's keep doing this. And I remember being up for 48 hours once. And I was supposed to go do a deposit. And I was like, no, I'm gonna just go home. It's fine. I'll go home. I'll do it tomorrow. It's not important. And little did I know that I didn't know what buttons I was pressing in my car. and I left my car unlocked, and I also left the trunk unlocked, and I had everything in the back. And the next morning I woke up and it was all gone. And I was
Oh.
like, this is great. I was like, this is amazing. You know what? I was like, this is exactly what's supposed to happen. And at that point, I was like, why me? Why da da da? And I learned that I was like, there's supposed to be things that happen to you. But at the moment, I was like, I hate everything. Oh my gosh, like you wouldn't think that this would happen because I was living in um, and I was living across the street from Spanish Trails, and I was like, you didn't think that that would happen in that area where people would just be like, oh, this is open, let me steal it. And I was just like, okay, let me see what I could do. I went to security. Obviously, the cameras that were there were just for show. And I was like, I can't do anything. I can't go to the police and be like, hey, they stole this or they stole this, because I didn't have a business license. I was looking for business insurance, but I didn't have a business license. So I was like, I might get in trouble. I don't know what I'm going to do. They might end up finding me for selling juices. And at that point, I had the knowledge from California where I see vendors getting arrested or being fined for just selling food. And I was like, that's going to happen to me. And from there, I stopped. I was like, okay, I did it. I don't need to do it again. I don't think I need this now. It's a lot of stress and I don't want to do it. So I went back to working another job, two jobs, and I was like, I hate this. I really hate this. And I was like, okay, it's been 3 years and I still haven't done anything for myself. Yeah, I graduated college, great, but what can I do when nobody's hiring a person who has no experience? Yeah, you have degrees, but no experience. So I went back into retail and I was like, okay, this is still boring. What can I do? And I was just like, I know I am meant to do more because I want more. I don't want to be, told what to do because I tend to talk back. And I'm very sarcastic with responses. And I remember in the last job that I had, they were even saying, they're like, you just don't have that customer service voice. It's like, no, I don't. I have you talk to me over the phone and it sounds like I'm sad voice, but I'm not. And they're just like, well, this is kind of what we want you to be. We want you to be Barbie. It's like, from the hood, because that's what you're gonna get. I'm like, I'm not gonna, I can't change my voice. I can't go high pitched because it's gonna strain my vocal cords, and then I'm gonna be in trouble for not being able to talk. So you kind of, get what it is. So then they were just like, well, you either you kind of change your outlook on how you talk, or it would be best for you to find another place to work. And I was like, this is terrible. I was like, working a job is so terrible. And I was just like, okay, great. So from there, I was just like, there's more. I know there's more. And I started learning about real estate. I went on Bigger Pockets and I read and I also heard the audiobook Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is a huge player in everyone's journey. And I was just going on and on about Bigger Pockets, their podcast, and I was like, this is what real estate can be. It's not just about being an agent, because a friend of mine was an agent and they would tell me, they're like, it's hard. It's hard being an agent. And this was about almost 10 years ago, which is very surprising. It makes me feel old. um, and I was like, okay, so it's not this. So it can be something more. So I just started saving more, working more jobs, getting as much as I can. And from there, I bought my first property and I flipped it. And I did it a couple of times and I realized, I was like, that was not for me. I don't have the patience for it. And I was just like, what is there else to do in real estate? Yeah, you can buy a house, you can fix it up. Okay, what else can you do? And I realized you can rent. And I didn't know that. Bigger Pockets taught me that. And I was like, there's more. Okay, so you can rent out a property. Okay. At that point, I was like, I don't have that much money anymore to buy a full property. So what can I do? So I started Googling a lot how to buy a property, what are other ways to buy a property, and seller financing came up. And I was like, what is seller financing? What is, owner carry? I didn't know any of this. And me being the person that I am, I didn't ask questions. It was like, Why am I going to ask questions? I can figure this out, which is very stubborn of me. And it comes from familiar traits. So we don't really go and ask for help. We kind of just figure it out. So I figured it out and it failed. And I was like, don't want to do this again. And I was like, but do you really want to work a job your whole life? Is this what you're meant to be? A person that's going to hate coming to work and honestly not like the people that you're around, but you're forced to talk to them? And I was like, no, let's try it again. Let's go and ask for help and see what we could do. And I did. And I was like, asking for help was probably the scariest thing I've ever done because I've always been taught, like, do it yourself or ask your family. And if you're family and you can't figure it out, then you're not meant to do it. And I was like, no, there's other resources for a reason. And I learned that a lot too in school, being the only one in my family that actually has degrees. I'm not the only one that graduated high school, but out of 5, I'm the most successful one. And it's a lot of people have told me, is that a lot of pressure? I was like, no, it's kind of like, hey, I'm the youngest and I did more. So, haha. And it pushed me. It's always pushed me, and I'm grateful for all the experiences that I've learned and asking people for help. Like, hey, how do you do this? I don't know how to do this, and being able to be comfortable with saying I don't know how to do something has really been a huge thing for me. And there's still stepping stones that I have to get over and be like, hey, it's normal. You can ask for help, or hey, this is normal. And I think just a lot of my growing up in the culture that I'm grown up, there's a lot of taboos of what you can't do and what you can do. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not in Mexico. So it doesn't relate to here. So from there, I was like, okay, let's ask a lawyer what seller financing is. How do I put a contract in and how do I approach people with this? So the lawyer was like, well, I'll help you with the contract. That's pretty much it that I can help with. Other than that, it's how you facilitate it. And I went again, got back on Bigger Pockets, and I was just looking up questions that people asked, and YouTube helped a lot. And I was like, okay, so I have to call people. It's like, I'm not prepared for this. I'm not prepared to be like, hi, my name is so and so. Do you want to sell your house for seller financing? And it was really like that. I would say my full name, and they're just like, oh, you're looking to sell something. And I was like, no, I'm hoping you can sell something to me. And they were just like, what? So from there, I was calling people and asking them, hey, like, it looks like your house doesn't have a mortgage on it, or you bought it over 10, 20 years ago. Do you mind doing seller financing? And me only having limited knowledge, I ended up changing their minds. And they're like, yeah, I'll be open to it. And they're just like, what are your terms? And I was like, what does terms mean? So I remember being on a call. I was like, terms for seller financing. And I was like, here, can you give me just a moment? And they're like, yeah. So I Googled it really quick and I was like, what are terms for seller financing? And they were and I saw it and I was like, okay, so we could do it this way, and this way. And I didn't know that you can change the percentage. I just thought it was a normal percentage. So I Googled national mortgage percent currently, and it was a 5. So for the first property I got, I put a 5%. And I was like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? But learning lessons, stepping stones. And I remember putting $15,000 down, and I ended up getting my first property that way. And it's a rental property.
Wow.
And I was like,
Wow, that's crazy.
with the 5%. And I was like, okay, so I can rent this out. Okay, let me go find renters. And I didn't know who to rent to, so I ended up just renting to a coworker. And from there, they were like, oh, okay, how much is the rent? And I was like, well, the mortgage is this. And Meyer was telling them the mortgage. So for like the first 2 years, I wasn't making anything, but they were paying it. So I was like, okay, I'm great. I don't have to do anything. And at that point, I was living with my family, so I didn't have to worry about, me actually having to save up or having a place to live because I was living with my family. And I was like, okay, next third year, I was earning so much, and I was like, okay, maybe I can get another property this way. So I kept doing it. So after getting my first property, I was like, I don't need to do this. They said in Bigger Pockets, as long as you can get 1 or 2 properties, you're golden. And I was like, okay, maybe I need more if I want to retire and not have to work a job. So 3 years pass and I get another property. And same way, obviously with the terms and interest, I ended up getting zero interest on it, so it's not just pure payment. And I was excited. And this was a house. So for me, it was a big step because it was a house. Not in the nicest area, but it was just something. So with that, I put $10,000 down, and I have I've had the property for about 3 years now. So I was like, yes, we can do something with this. So I started renting out each room, and I that's how I found about essentially about house hacking, because I remember an episode for Burger Pockets was talking about it, and I was like, okay, great. This is something that I could do. And I started seeing that I was making like $300 extra a month. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even have to worry about maintenance because my dad knew everything about taking care of a house because he used to work in that. So I was like, okay, so now I know this, and now I know I'm not meant for flipping. I am decent when it comes to finding people. And I was like, what is there to do? I just don't want to wait every month to see what can happen next. And I went back to Google, and I was like, hey, how do you make money off of real estate? And, and from there, it's like investing, buying properties. And I was like, what are other ways to invest? So the like 10 options came up, and the next, like, I saw wholesaling. And I was like, how do you wholesale real estate? Like, do you just buy a bunch and then you sell it off at a discount? Because that's what I was thinking. And I was
That's what
like,
wholesale is, yeah, in general.
like, is that even possible? So in my head, I'm like, oh, mobile parks. If I was like, who lives in mobile parks? And I was like, is there even mobile parks in Vegas? And I'm like, where are there mobile parks in Nevada? And Reno came up. And I remember having a friend over there, and they were telling me, they're like, yeah, there's a lot of mobile parks over here. Like, it's normal. I was like, that's normal over there? Like, why is that normal over there? And Fernley has them, Hawthorne has them. And I was like, okay, so I was just researching, and I came upon someone that ended up teaching me a lot about wholesaling. And I'm grateful for them because they taught me all the bad, and then they taught me how I can improve the bad. But from there, I was like, I've been hooked, and I was like, this is awesome. And I know, like, in the back of my head, I always tell myself, I was like, you know what? I am meant to do more because the way that I am, I'm not fit for a job. I'm not fit to, be forced into a kind of a model. I always would tell, people, I'd be like, hey, I'm a hard worker, but I'm a terrible employee. I will not be the best employee that you're looking for, but guarantee you it's going to get done. And surprisingly, I would still get hired after telling people that. And I'm like, why would you hire them? And then they would still complain. It's like, well, you're not the employee. And I'm like, I told you from the beginning, I'm not the best employee. I'm a hard worker. I'll get what needs to get done. And they were just like, well, that is true. But, now that you have the job, and I'm like, okay, but I mean, find a reason to fire me, but I'm going to stay here because that's the mindset that I had. So
Mhm.
I was just like, the minute that I realized that I could get into real estate and grow at a big scale, I was like, this is completely different from anything that I experienced because I get to choose my customers. I get to choose, clients. I have full direction of what it was versus when I, did the juice. I was just selling to anybody who approached, and I would get a lot of backlash where it's like, oh, well, I didn't want this, or, it shouldn't be this or this. And I was like, I don't care for your complaints. You asked for my service. If you want complaints, go to someone who's going to care. And that was literally my response. And my end was like, I'm not customer certified. I will probably be like, okay, great. That's your opinion. If you don't want it, then leave, but don't ask for it again. And that's where I realized I was like, yeah, I need people who are customer service people because I more likely, less and so, don't have a filter when people come and tell me certain things. And I was like, yeah, I should probably have. And I remember doing a couple deals um, up in Reno, and the sellers were like, well, there's this or there's this. And I'm like, okay, well, your property needs a lot of repair. I can send a contractor out there, but guarantee you it's not going to sell for your neighbor because your neighbor has updates. I'm like, do you want to pay for updates on your property? And they're like, are you even trying to buy my house? Because it sounds like you're just mad. I was like, yeah, I mean, we can, but I never said I was going to buy it. I'm just helping somebody out to be able to buy your house. And from there, I was like, I need people. I need people who have that. Hi, thank you for calling. We're so great to hear from you. And with me, I'm like, I could do it once. And even people who know me. And if you call me, I'm right away answering, hey, what's up? What do you need? And people who don't know me are like so thrown off, and they're like, I just wanted to say hi. And I'm like, okay, you said hi. Bye. But that's naturally how I've always been. Like how when
Right.
when I saw you at Ryan's event, I was like, I'm socially awkward. But keep in mind that day I fell on top of a handicap carrier, or like a wheelchair carrier. So I fell literally minutes before I got there. And I was like, I should probably go home. And I
Jeez.
have a permanent dent in my shin from it. Yeah.
Oh
So everyone was like,
no.
why are you even here? And I was like, because I was already on my way. And that's really far away from my house. So might as well just be here. But yeah,
Well,
so I've been like that.
wow. So what was the transition going from, because you went through a lot of things in real estate. You first started the flips, you're like, I don't like flipping. You learned about creative finance, and then you started to think about wholesaling. Now, it seems like wholesaling is what you like now, or what you're doing at least. What was the transition like for the first deal? What was the first deal like on the wholesale deal? Like, how did you even find it? What was the deal like as far as numbers go? And after doing it, what was your thoughts? Was it, oh, I'm gonna keep doing this, or was it still, I don't really like this thing?
So the first deal, it was a trailer house that needed a lot of repair. And the person that I was JVing with, they said that, they have all the resources, so you just have to call. And with me again, I was like, oh, I don't want to call people. I've always had to do that my whole life. I'd always have to call people, and I don't want to do this. But I was like, hey, get out of your comfort zone. Stop comparing situations. You're not calling for your parents, you're calling for yourself. Do it. So I called and I was letting them know. I was like, hi, my name is Jasmine. I work with so and so. We're looking to see if you're open to an offer. And they're like, an offer for what? And I was like, your property, your property. And they're just like, which one? And I'm like, give me a minute. I don't have the address. So obviously they're like, you're calling me. You don't even have the information. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry. Here, just a moment. So I was super awkward. And I was just telling him, I was like, we're looking to offer you here for, $60,000 for your property.
Are you still there?
Yeah. Some people are passing by.
Okay. Oh, okay, no worries. It's editable.
Okay. So I was like, we're willing to offer you $60,000 for your property, and it was gonna ARV for about 120, I believe. And I was like, it'll be 60. And you're like, huh? You think I'm gonna sell my house for $60,000? Are you crazy? And me not knowing that you're not supposed to say certain things, I was like, well, yeah. I mean, if we fix up your house, it'll sell for a higher price. And I was like, I remember hearing the recording and getting yelled at, but at that moment, it was like, yeah, it'll sell at a higher price, but it needs a lot of work. And for us to be able to sell it again, we want to be able to make sure that we're getting a fair price. And they were telling me, they were like, oh, so you're looking to just buy my house, fix it, and sell it again? It's like, yeah, we are. And they were just like, well, no, we don't want to work with you if you want to do that. And they hung up. And I remember telling them, I remember telling the partner that I was working with, I was like, I told him this. And they're like, you're not supposed to say that. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And they're like, you're supposed to follow the script. And I was like, oh, I thought you just gave me that to look at it. I didn't know what it was for. And they're like, yeah, we told you this. You follow the script and you just go with the answers that we gave you. And I was like, okay. So I called them again a week later. And I just tell them, like, hey, I was curious to know so and so, and all the information. We're willing to offer you $50,000. I know prior I told them 60, but I was like, let's see if they're willing to go at 50. And they were like, hey, you know what? We actually had an offer. Someone called us last time for 60,000, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. I was like, oh. Yeah.
That was
And the thing
you.
is that I went from my awkward normal voice to, I was like, oh my god, that is, you know what? If you want, we can totally go at $60,000. So obviously, my voice, my tone, it was more customer service. So I was letting them know, I was like, you know what? If it is something that you want to do, we can. And if you're interested too, we can also cover the closing costs. You don't have to worry about it. And we have the title company that it is that we want to work with. Are you open to that option? And we'll buy it as is, because we noticed that it needed a little work on the outside. And they were just like, yeah, I kind of need some work on the inside too. And I just said the outside and they volunteered the information. So I was just asking them open-ended questions and I ended up closing the deal. And I was so surprised. I was like,
Wow.
wow, me being a whole Barbie character helped and restricting information and, not saying my name. I was like, okay, we could do this. So we ended up closing, I think they ended up selling it for even higher and I got a commission of $1,000, which I realized at the moment I was like, this is a lot of money. But now that I'm in it, I was like, I was getting ripped off. But
That's crazy. So just a week later, the conversation of no, we're not going to work with you, versus a week later, you speaking with customer service voice, being more open ended and following the script, actually getting the deal done. Now, what was the actual profit on that
so
deal
the
if
assignment
you
that they ended
knew?
up assigning it for was over $10,000. Yeah. So they
Gotcha.
profited 9,000 and I stuck with the one. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that with wholesaling, you could go at
Hmm.
that rate. My knowledge was like, oh, you can only go to $1,000 to $2,000. So I was like, oh my God, I got a lot of money. And all I did was call people. So from there, I think they ended up selling it for 120 later after fixing it up, whoever bought it. So I was like, okay, great. Like, this is interesting. And it wasn't until a year of working with them that I was like, I'm totally getting ripped off. And I don't like the way that they do certain things because with them, it was, telling them like, hey, we're buying your property in cash. It's us. We're the ones that are gonna do it. And I realized I was like, we're not buying it. I don't want to keep lying to people. I don't want to, have people call us back and say you're liars. Da, da, da. And I would get that. And to me at that age and the experience, I was like, how do you deal with this kind of backlash? How are you okay with people yelling at you and saying, oh my gosh, you ripped me off. You guys are cheaters. You guys all care about money. And in my head, I'm like, no, I'm just doing a job. I don't know what else to do. Um, so from there, I just learned that. And I was like, that's super crazy. I was excited for it after because, like 2 weeks later after closing, I ended up getting $1,000. But I was like, this feels great. I like this. And I don't have to do much physically.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. It's a great route because you can build income from it, and you don't have to actually buy the
Mm-hmm.
properties yourself. Now, after that first deal, what did it look like after that? Like, what was your game plan? Like, I'm assuming you left to do this on your own. It sounded like, and was it what you expected? Was it a lot harder on your own? Because that's a similar story to me. Like, I was with a mentor. We learned for about, I think, 6 months with him, and I was realizing I was, making 1,000 when I was giving him 30,000 and stuff like that on all these deals. And I was like, whoa! But then I needed it. I needed the experience. And then I told him, I was like, I think I'm ready to do this on my own. And it was a lot harder than I thought, completely by myself. So what did that
Yeah,
look
so I
like for
was with
you?
them for about a year until I realized it. And then they started changing dynamics. And they were like, hey, instead of 1,000, we're cutting cost and we're going to now have to pay you 500. And I was like, that doesn't make sense because I didn't know how much they were making. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. I was going from 1,000 and now I'm getting 500 down in a pay cut. At that point, I was saving up everything that I could. I was still working a job. And I was like, what can I do? And I ended up the next following year, I ended up just doing it on my own. And yeah, it was super hard to a degree because I didn't know what softwares, I didn't pay
Mhm.
attention to what softwares they were using. And I know that they had a CRM, but I just knew that it was something that we just inputted the data and we confirmed that it was closed or if it was open. So I had the I already had the connections. I already was communicating with other people, and I was like, what else can I do? How else can I learn? So I went back to Google and I went back to Bigger Pockets. And I was like, how do you do this on your own? And I went back to YouTube. And there's a famous wholesaler there that he's now in Costa Rica, I believe, or Puerto Rico, one of those. And he's been hustling. So I like nonstop for like good 3 months was watching his videos, watching them, watching them, watching them. And I was like, okay, I could do this. I know I can do this. I already have the resources, I have the knowledge, and I know what I want to do. So I sat down and I told myself, what don't you want to do? I don't want to lie to people. I want to tell them we're a third party service. We can help you sell your house faster and in cash. And we'll be honest. We'll be honest and as transparent as needed. And that's where I was like, okay, I want to be honest and I want to tell people I'm not going to buy your house because I hated doing that. And I hated people calling us later saying, oh, you're liars. And then from there, I was like, what else? How do I implement this? How do I even get leads? So I Googled how do you get real estate leads, and PropStream came up. And then from there, Batch Leads came up. So a bunch of other programs came up. So I was using those, and I was like, okay, what else? What else can I do? What else do I do? So I started just cold calling people. And I was like, hey, I noticed that your house was recently listed. What happened? What's going on? What was the trouble that you had listing your property or trying to sell it? So they would tell me. And they're like, well, this is where it is. We want to be at this because our mortgage is this. And I was like, okay, let me see what I could do. And after like a day or two, I ended up finding I ended up calling them back, letting them know, like, hey, you know what, we can come in at this price. Me not knowing that I needed a buyer for anything, I was like, okay, we can lock your property up at this price. And they're like, you know what, that works. And it was a very high price. And I was like, okay, what else do I do? I didn't have the contract because I just was literally just making calls and confirming what price we were doing. And I was sending that information off to someone else. And I was like, we could do it at this price. And they're like, okay, well, send me a contract over. We'll have a lawyer review it. And the minute that they said lawyer, I was like, I don't know what to do. What do I do? And I was like, I just remember calling people. I never really did the contracts. I don't know this. And I remember, I don't know who said it, but they were like, if you're doing anything in real estate, read an RPA, read your state RPA. So that popped up in my head. I read an RPA, and there was like 4 different ones. And I was like, I don't know what else to do. So I ended up just downloading one from online, and I filled it out and sent it to them, not knowing what I was filling out, but I just sent it to them. And they're like, oh, okay, so our lawyer says that this is wrong. And you know what, because this information, we're not going to follow through. But if you have a real buyer, then let us know. Or if you're really being a serious buyer, then let us know. So from there, I was like, I don't know what to do. I researched contracts, ended up just going to a lawyer and was like, I need an assignment of release contract and I need my own RPA. So we went through it and they helped me out. They really did. And I was like, okay, great, help. I was like, I gotta get comfortable with that. And from there, it was going again, calling another house and letting them know, like, hey, I have this. Here's this contract. I could send it over. I can walk the property if you want to know who I am. So I ended up doing that for that house, and that house needed a lot of work. And I ended up getting the house under contract, but I didn't have a buyer and I didn't know where to look for buyers. So the contract fell through. And I was like, what do I do? How do I even do this? Why is this so much harder than it was before? But it was because there was everybody
Mm-hmm.
else doing everything for me. And I was like, okay, let's sit down again and see how we can do this. Because all of the sites that say, get a property, then find a buyer. And I was like, that's stressful. I don't want stress. So I did everything reverse. Find a buyer, ask them what they want. What is it that you're looking for? Kind of act like an agent, but know that, hey, I know what it is that you're looking for. Here's the ARV. Here's what it can rent. And if you're looking to do Airbnb too. So for short and long term, here's that information. A lot of agents that I know don't really know that much information, or they just don't work with investors, or they're new. So it's by choice. So I was like, okay, let me go out and find buyers. Again, Google how do you find buyers for real estate properties, and it came up to meetups. So I went to a meetup here in Las Vegas, and it was in PTs. It was my very first meetup. I didn't know how to dress. I didn't know how to act. I didn't know what to do. So me being my introverted self, I dressed up really nice, because that's what Lions do. Some do. We dress up nice just to go to the simplest places. And I sat down in the farthest corner possible and hid myself. And I was like, okay, I'm here. What do I do? And I didn't want to talk to anybody. And some woman, I don't remember, up until this day, I don't remember her name, and I've seen her around. She's like, what is it that you do? It's like, I wholesale. And she's like, really? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, how many contracts have you done? And I was like, none, but I'm learning. And she's like, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to find you a buyer. And I was like, okay, great. How do I do that? She's like, well, first you got to get up and don't sit slouched. Don't have your arms crossed. just be open to a conversation. And from her, she was bringing people over. She's like, oh, there's this girl, she wholesales. And I was like, don't tell people that I haven't done a deal. She's like, it's okay, you'll do one with these people. So I ended up telling her, I was like, hey, I'm learning a wholesale. I did it before, but I didn't do the back end. So just be cautious. And from there, I just started going to meetups and talking to people. And those people I really never did any deals with. And it wasn't until I got a hang of what I was doing and knowing the knowledge that I went to Tivoli Village, which is very close to my house. And I was talking to people. I was on the phone and making calls, and Tivoli Village, especially if you've ever been to Leon Cafe, that place gets packed. It's never empty. And I was making calls, and a person came up to me, and they're like, "I don't mean to interrupt you, but what is it that you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I wholesale properties." And they're like, "Oh, what is that?" And I was like, "Well, if you're looking to buy a property for cash or renovate it, I could do that for you. I could get you the property, and you can do what it is that you need to do, but I'll bring you the data." And from there, that was my very first buyer ever, and that was my very first experience ever. And they were like, "Hey, we could buy 2 properties at a time," and I was like, "Oh, 2?" I was like, "I can barely do one." I was like, "I don't do 2." And they're
That's
like, "No, we
awesome.
trust you." And I was like, I literally told them, I was like, "Why? You don't even know me." And they're like, "No, we know you. We know you." And I was just like, "No, you don't." And I was like,
That's awesome.
like, hey, I
That's
guess blind
awesome.
trust really, they helped me a lot because they've been a long-term buyer too.
Yeah, what I love is like your whole story is a lot of it is just you knowing yourself, you knowing your strengths, you knowing who you are. And if you don't like something, you're like, nope, I gotta try this, I gotta try this until it finally worked out. Now, for the people listening, if anyone has any deals they want to partner with, wholesale with in Vegas or even Reno, hit up Jasmine. I'll make sure to put her social media links in the description or the show notes below. And Jasmine, before we head out too, I want to know what's your overall message that you want to share with people. Doesn't have to be business or real estate. Just if you had one message you wanted to share with the
In
world,
all
what is your
honesty,
message?
I don't know if I could say bad words in in your show, but in honesty,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if they bother you, then start opinionating yourself first. Because if you can tolerate all the negative stuff that you say to yourself, then you're not going to care about what other people have to say. And that's something that I learned along the way, that I'm
Hmm.
like, you know what, opinions, I don't care. It's about me, and it's always going to be about me, and it's always me about it's versus me with who I was yesterday and who I can be tomorrow. So who cares about what other people have to say?
Yeah, I love that message because it's something that I noticed in your story, and it's honestly true. The more you can disregard other people's
Mm-hmm.
opinions, the better off you'll be. It's just you got to do things for yourself. So, Jasmine, thank you so much for being on it. It really means a lot. I know that people will love your story. I loved hearing it. Just hearing all the things you went through to get where you are today. So I
Well, thank you for
appreciate you
having
being
me,
on.
Chester. I appreciate it.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you guys for
Bye bye.
listening.